The twin suns of Valyria Namon hung low over the crystal towers, creating orange and purple shadows across the meeting room, where human lives were bought and sold like goods. Marcus Chen stood in iron chains, his breath making small clouds in the recycled air, watching the alien leaders discuss his future with the same casual interest someone might use when picking fruit at a store. The woman in front of him, Sarathlin of the Valori, stood perfectly still in her glowing ceremonial armor. Her blue skin reflected the room's changing lights, and her face was impossible to read behind eyes that had seen 3 decades more than his entire life. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The Valyrian council chamber stretched impossibly high, its walls made from living crystal that pulsed with the combined consciousness of 1,000 peace agreements. Marcus had been standing for 3 hours, his wrists sore beneath the ceremonial chains that marked him as collateral term. The human group had dressed up as cultural liaison, but everyone knew meant hostage. Around him, representatives from a dozen species negotiated the terms of Earth's continued access to the Nexus Gateway, the only passage through which supply ships could reach the struggling colonies on the edge. His mother's face haunted him from the observation deck above, her expression frozen between motherly pain and desperate hope. The colony on Kepler 442b was dying. The air-making machines were failing. Without the gateway passage, they had 6 months of oxygen left, maybe 7 if they started giving children smaller portions. "The human offer is not enough value," said Ambassador Sexther, his insect-like jaws clicking with obvious disgust. "Their technology is basic, their cultural contributions unimportant." Marcus watched his fate being debated in a language his translator Chip struggled to fully understand. Embarrassment burned in his chest, but he'd been trained to show nothing. The moment he displayed emotion, the negotiations would turn even more brutal. "I propose a different arrangement." Sarah's voice cut through the chamber like a knife through silk. She had been silent until now, standing in the Vori section with a stillness that made her seem almost like a statue. When she moved forward, the glowing patterns on her skin shifted from cool blue to something warmer, more golden. She was tall, nearly 7 feet in her ceremonial armor, with features that were both alien and hauntingly beautiful. High cheekbones framed those unsettling ice pupils that narrowed vertically like a predator's. Her auburn hair, shot through with silver that showed her age and status, was tied in complicated braids. "The Vori will sponsor Earth's Gate passage in exchange for a formal marriage bond," she continued, her words causing a wave of surprise through the assembled species. "You would bind yourself to this child." Ambassador Sexther's disbelief was obvious. "Sarathulin, you are of the first generation. Your family line traces to the founding voyagers. This human hasn't even completed 3 decades of life." "I am aware of our age difference." Saratholin's gaze never left Marcus. The chamber erupted in a storm of reactions. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Marriage. They were negotiating his marriage like a business deal. "The human must agree," came a voice from the judicial sector. All eyes turned to Marcus. His mother's face was pressed against the observation glass above. Behind her, he could see the rest of the group frightened. Desperate people whose children were slowly suffocating on a distant world. He thought of his younger sister, 12 years old, who'd been coughing blood for the past month. "I consent." The words left his mouth before his mind fully processed them. As the guards removed his chains, Marcus watched Sarathlin turn and walk away, her armored form moving with predatory grace. She didn't look back. She had simply purchased his life with her own freedom. But in the upper galleries, where the Vori group sat, several of her family were watching with expressions he couldn't quite read. Not approval, something darker, something that looked almost like anticipation, as if waiting for something specific to happen. The preparation rooms beneath the Hall of Convergence were unlike anything Marcus had experienced. The walls seemed alive, shifting through subtle color patterns that the Valori instructor explained corresponded to emotional energy fields. "You must understand, Calvin," the cultural guide assigned to him, was young for a barely 60 cycles with bright emerald patterns across his skin. "The naming ceremony is not merely symbolic. When Sarah speaks your name in the old tongue, she is putting part of her consciousness into the sound structure. You will carry a piece of her identity within yours." "That sounds invasive." Marcus pulled at the ceremonial garment they draped over his shoulders. "It is intimate," Calvin corrected. "You will become connected to each other. You'll sense her strong emotions. She will sense yours. but she's doing this for political reasons. Marcus turned to face the young Vori. Calvin's patterns shifted darker. Did she tell you why she needs to prove that point? No. Sarah lost her previous bond partner 40 cycles ago. Her children from that union both died in the Koroth uprising. She spent 2 decades in grief isolation. This bond with you is not merely political theater, Marcus Chen. It is her final attempt to create meaning from loss. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding. The older woman who had stood before the council with such cold precision suddenly seemed less like a political strategist and more like a person carrying unimaginable grief. A deep harmonic sound filled the chamber, the signal that the solar alignment was approaching. The hall of convergence was massive, but the ceremony took place in a small circle at the center. As Marcus emerged, he saw Sarothalin in ritual attire that exposed most of her blue skin, allowing the glowing patterns to display at full intensity. They moved across her body like living light. Her hair was unbound, flowing down her back in that striking auburn and silver cascade. She wore minimal jewelry, just a single crystal pendant containing traces of her deceased bond partner and children. Their eyes met across the platform, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine uncertainty in her expression. The council judge raised their crystal appendages. We gather at the meeting of 3 moons and 2 suns to witness the binding of souls across the space between worlds. Sarathulin of House Valtheran, first generation of the founding voyagers, you have claimed bond right with this human. State your intention. Sarathlin stepped forward, patterns intensifying. I claim Marcus Chen as my bond partner to share purpose and presence for the duration of our agreement or the end of our lives, whichever comes first. I offer him the protection of my house, the status of my family line, and the commitment of my consciousness. Marcus Chen of Earth, Colony Kepler 44-B. You have accepted bond right with this Valori. State your intention. Marcus took a breath. I accept Sarathulin as my bond partner. I offer her the truth of my experience, the respect of my actions, and the commitment of my consciousness. In return, I ask only that she honor the bond with patience and understanding as I learn what it means to exist between 2 worlds. The Valori elders moved forward, painting symbols on his chest and arms that tingled like static electricity. Then they approached Sarathalin. The marking is complete, the first elder announced. Now comes the naming. Let there be silence for the speaking of true names. The hall became absolutely silent. Sarah moved closer until they stood barely a foot apart. She raised her hands, placing them on either side of his face. Her skin was cool, but not cold. When she spoke his name in the old tongue, it wasn't just a word, it was a sensation. Mark. The sounds rolled through him like a wave. He felt her presence suddenly, not physically, but consciously, as if a door had opened in his mind. Emotions flickered at the edge of his awareness. Grief, determination, hope, fear, all of them hers. His turn. He raised his hands, placing them on either side of her face. He spoke her name exactly as Calvin had trained him. Sarathulin, Vula, Enkoth. The response was immediate. The bond snapped into place like a physical thing. Her eyes widened slightly, and through that strange new connection, he felt her surprise. The bond was stronger than expected, much stronger. It is done, the council judge declared. Let the bond be recorded in the collective archives. The hall erupted in harmonic celebration. Through it all, Marcus felt something from Sarah that she would never have shown on her face. Terror, not of him, but of what they just created. And in the galleries above, those same elders who had watched with anticipation were now smiling, as if everything was going exactly according to a plan neither Marcus nor Sarathulin had been told about. The integration tour began the next day. Days of public appearances across multiple worlds where they were displayed as proof of successful cross-species bonding. Each world brought new challenges, but through it all, Marcus noticed certain groups watching with that strange anticipation. On the 4th day, aboard a diplomatic vessel, Marcus confronted Sarathalin in the observation deck, where she often retreated during transit. You're hiding something from me, he said. I can feel it through the bond. You're carrying knowledge that directly relates to our arrangement, and you're afraid of what happens when I discover it. Sarathalin didn't turn from the window, but her patterns shifted to darker colors. Through the bond, Marcus felt her internal struggle. You're right, she finally said, and you deserve to know the truth. But once I tell you, everything changes. She gestured for him to follow her to a more private section. When they were alone, she pulled up a holographic display showing complex genetic diagrams. 300 cycles ago, the Valori discovered something about cross-species bonding that we've kept hidden. She began. We learned that under specific circumstances, vast age difference, traumatic loss, genuine consent, and certain genetic compatibility markers, cross-species bonds can evolve beyond simple emotional connection. Evolve how? They can trigger dormant genetic sequences. Sarathalin's voice was barely above a whisper. Sequences that suggest we're not as different as we appear, that perhaps all intelligent life in this region shares a common ancestor from an older, more advanced civilization. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. That's impossible. She pulled up another display showing side-by-side DNA analysis between humans, Valori, and other collective species. Highlighted sections showed identical genetic sequences, or were certain adjustments made to your evolutionary path by an intelligence that existed before our civilizations. We call them the architects. And you think our bond is triggering these sequences? I know it is. Saratholin met his eyes. I've been monitoring both of our biological markers since the bonding ceremony. We're both changing. The bond is rewriting our DNA. In another few months, we'll have genetic markers that are neither fully human nor fully Vorial. Be something new. Marcus moved to the window. Is that why they supported the bond? They wanted to see if this would happen. Yes, Sarothalin's admission carried bitter understanding. I thought I was using political pressure for integration. In reality, they were using me, using both of us. The prophecy suggests that when the sequences fully express, the bonded pair will have access to knowledge or abilities that could reshape the collective. So they're waiting to see if we become weapons or prophets. And I need to know, Marcus, now that you understand, do you want to end the bond? It can still be done, though it would be painful and politically catastrophic. Marcus was silent. Through the bond, he could sense Sarah's guilt, fear, and anger, but he could also feel genuine connection developing between them. If we end the bond now, what happens to the genetic changes already underway? They'll stabilize at current levels. You'll live a normal human lifespan with minor enhancements. I'll return to being fully Vori. We'll both be lessened versions of what we might have become. And if we continue, then in 6 months, the sequences fully expressed, we'll discover together what the architects intended. Marcus turned to face her. You asked me once if I showed wisdom or deep foolishness by walking willingly toward this bond. I think maybe the answer is both. I think maybe that's what love is, the wisdom to know you're making a potentially foolish choice, and doing it anyway because the alternative is worse. Love. Sarah's patterns flickered with surprise. Marcus, we've known each other less than a lunar cycle. We're from different species. I'm 30 years your senior, and yet here we are, he said quietly, genetically rewriting ourselves. Emotionally connected through a bond neither of us fully understands. If that's not the foundation for some kind of love, then I don't know what is. Through the bond, he felt her emotional walls crumbling. And then, for the first time since they'd bonded, Sarah reached out and took his hand. I didn't want to care about you, she admitted. I didn't want to risk that kind of loss again, but you're right. What we have is already beyond simple political arrangement. Then we continue. Marcus squeezed her hand. Whatever happens next, whatever we become, we face it together and we make sure that no one gets to determine our purpose for us. You understand that could mean war. Then we'll deal with war if it comes, Marcus said with certainty. But we'll deal with it as bond partners, as equals, as whatever we're becoming together. The next 3 months passed in a blur of increasingly dramatic biological changes. Marcus began waking with memories that couldn't possibly be his visions of worlds he'd never visited. Speaking languages his translator chip didn't recognize. Sarah experienced similar things. The bond between them deepened beyond emotional connection. They began finishing each other's sentences, sensing needs before they were spoken, moving in unconscious coordination. The glowing patterns on Sarah's skin started appearing on Marcus's body as faint tracings. His human features remained, but there was something in his eyes now that looked alien, ancient, knowing. The council grew nervous. Emergency meetings were called. There was talk of containment protocols. But Saratholin's political position made her difficult to detain, and Marcus' human heritage meant that Earth's diplomatic corps began taking interest. It was Calvin who first noticed the knowledge emerging. Marcus had been helping Saratholin with diplomatic letters when he suddenly began writing in a script that neither of them recognized, but both somehow understood. It was mathematical, but not human mathematics or Vori geometry. It was something else entirely. equations that described space-time in ways that made the gateway technology look basic. "This is it," Sarothalin breathed, staring at the symbols. "This is what the architects wanted us to know: how to control space-time at the quantum level, how to travel not just between stars but between dimensions." "But why us?" Marcus looked at his hand. "Why activate this knowledge now, after thousands of years of sleep?" "Perhaps," came a new voice from the entrance, "because there are things returning to this region of space that the architects wanted us to be prepared for." An older Valori woman entered. Her patterns faded with extreme age. Dressed in robes that marked her as part of the Keeper, caste scholars who maintained historical records. "Keeper Shalvain," Sarathalin rose, surprised. "When the dormant sequences begin expressing in a bonded pair, the Keepers are automatically notified." The ancient Vori moved slowly into the room. "We've been watching you both, waiting to see if the prophecy would prove true." "Everyone keeps talking about prophecy," Marcus said, "but no one has explained what exactly is supposed to happen." "Then you should know." Keeper Shalvain moved to examine the equations. The architects embedded two types of knowledge in the dormant sequences. One type enables transcendence evolution beyond physical form into something higher, leaving the material universe behind. The other type enables salvation using the knowledge to protect and preserve physical life across all species when the threat returns. "What threat?" Sarothalin demanded. "The same threat that drove the architects to abandon their physical forms and transcend this dimension." The Keeper's voice was grave. "The Harvesters, entities that consume entire civilizations. Feeding on the collective consciousness of intelligent species, they follow repeating patterns, returning every 50,000 years to destroy any civilization that has grown too advanced. The architects discovered their approach too late to develop weapons, but in time to leave behind the tools for younger races to defend themselves." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "You're saying there are hostile entities out there that eat entire civilizations, and they're coming back?" "Not coming," Keeper Shalvain corrected. "Already here. Their advanced scouts entered this sector approximately 2 cycles ago. The Council has been trying to keep it quiet to avoid panic, but the Keepers know. We've seen the disappeared colonies. The entire world's going silent without explanation. And when does the full swarm arrive?" Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Current projections suggest 3 to 5 years. The Keeper met her eyes. "Which is why the activation of your dormant sequences is both perfectly timed and potentially our only hope. You're not just two people who fell in love across species boundaries. You're weapons or saviors, the choice of which is about to become very important." "What do we need to do?" Marcus asked. "Complete the transformation," Keeper Shalvain said simply. "Let the dormant sequences fully express, and then hope that the love you've developed for each other is strong enough to keep you anchored in this dimension, because the transcendence option is tempting. The architects found it irresistible. But if you transcend, you leave us all behind to face the Harvesters alone." She left them with that burden. Marcus and Sarah stood in the quiet study, surrounded by equations that described impossible physics. "We could refuse," Sarah said quietly, "while the Harvesters consume everything we know and everyone we love." Marcus shook his head. "No, we finish this. We become whatever the architects designed us to become, and we stay. We fight." "That's remarkably noble for someone who started this journey, just trying to save one small colony." "That colony contains my sister," Marcus replied, "and your people contain the memory of your lost children. If we have the power to help them, then using it isn't noble, it's just necessary." Through their bond, Sarothalin felt the absolute certainty behind his words. "Then we see this through together, whatever we become, whatever it costs us. We face it as partners." In that moment of shared decision, they felt the next wave of transformation begin, knowledge flooding their consciousness. Not just physics equations, but combat strategies, dimensional manipulation techniques, the ability to see threats across space-time. They were becoming the weapons the architects had designed, but they were becoming them together, bound not just by genetic engineering, but by genuine love. The Harvester War began 6 months later, when the advanced scouts coordinated their attack on 3 major colonies simultaneously. Marcus and Sarah, their transformation nearly complete, responded with abilities that seemed like miracles to those watching. They manipulated space-time, folded dimensions, channeled energy in ways that defied known physics. But they weren't alone. 17 other bonded pairs across the collective couples who'd heard their story and chosen to activate their own dormant sequences joined the defense. Together, they formed humanity's greatest shield against an ancient threat. The war was brutal. Marcus watched his sister's world come under attack, felt Sarathalin's terror echoing his own through their bond as they raced across dimensions to defend Kepler 44b. The battle lasted 48 hours. When it ended, the colony was saved, but Marcus and Sarah had changed fundamentally. They could no longer fully return to physical form. They existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The turning point came when Sarathalan made first contact with the Harvester collective consciousness. Through the dimensional barriers, she reached out not with weapons, but with understanding. "They're not predators," she told the assembled collective council, her form flickering between physical and something else. "They're refugees, desperate survivors from a disaster even older than the architects. They consume civilizations because it's the only way they know to survive." The knowledge embedded in their genetic sequences included alternatives, ways to generate consciousness, energy, the harvesters needed without destroying intelligent life, but it required sacrifice. The bonded pairs would need to maintain constant dimensional barriers, becoming living shields between normal space and the void where the harvesters lived. "We'll do it," Marcus said without hesitation. Through the bond, he felt Sarathalan's immediate agreement. "All of us will become the barriers, but the harvesters must agree to feed only on naturally leaked energy, ever again to harvest through extinction." The negotiation took months, but eventually the harvesters agreed. They had been consuming civilizations out of desperation, not evil. Given an alternative, they chose peace. The war ended not with destruction, but with understanding, and the bonded pairs took their positions at the dimensional boundaries, becoming something between mortal and eternal. 10 years after the bonding ceremony, Marcus stood with Sarathalan on a platform overlooking Earth. They'd returned for a dedication ceremony honoring those lost in the harvester attacks. But stood wasn't quite accurate anymore. They existed in a state that was part physical appearance, part dimensional consciousness. "Do you regret it?" Sarathalan asked, though through their bond, she already knew the answer. "Not for a second," Marcus replied. "We saved trillions. We created lasting peace. We proved love can cross impossible boundaries. We also locked ourselves into an arrangement with no end date. We have each other." Marcus turned to her. "And we have purpose." How many people can say that? Behind them, representatives from all major species gathered. Among them were the other bonded pairs, young couples who'd followed their example. "Do you think they imagined this, the architects? Did they imagine we'd use the sequences not for transcendence, but for service?" "I think they left the choice open," Marcus said. "They gave us tools. We decided what to build. And we built something they apparently couldn't love, strong enough to keep us anchored when escape was offered. A love built from forced marriage, political convenience, and 30 years age difference. Good thing no one expected what happened next." The ceremony began. Marcus and Sarah stood together, hands intertwined, patterns glowing on both their skins. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. The bonded pairs maintaining dimensional barriers became legendary, the guardians. Some called them. Marcus and Sarathalan watched civilizations rise and fall from their position at reality's boundary. They saw Marcus' sister grow old, surrounded by family on Kepler 44b. They saw Sarah's people evolve, incorporating the lessons of cross-species bonding into their culture. They saw humanity spread across the stars, and through it all they remained connected, not just by the bond, or the genetic transformation, or the responsibility they'd accepted, but by genuine love. On Earth, in the Monument Plaza, a new generation gathered to hear the story of Marcus Chen and Sarathalan Va, children of a dozen species sitting together, learning about the bond that had saved the universe. Did they really love each other? A small human child asked the keeper telling the story. The ancient scholar smiled, patterns glowing softly on weathered blue skin, herself a descendant of one of the original bonded pairs. "They did," she said simply. "Not at first, perhaps. Not when politics forced them together. Not when age and species and culture stood between them like walls. But love isn't always about perfect beginnings. Sometimes it's about two people deciding that the connection between them matters more than all the reasons it shouldn't work. Are they still out there protecting us? Always." The keeper gestured to the sky. "In the spaces between dimensions, holding the barriers that keep the harvesters at bay." Marcus and Sarathalan and all the bonded pairs who followed their example, watching, protecting, loving. proving every day that the strongest force in the universe isn't technology or weapons, or even the ancient knowledge of the architects. What is it then? Love, the keeper said softly. Love that crosses boundaries. Love that chooses service over escape. Love that says, I will stand with you even when the universe offers you every reason to walk away. The children sat in silence, processing this wisdom. Above them, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, and in the quantum spaces between dimensions, Marcus and Serathorn felt the gathering's presence. They're telling our story again. Seratholin's consciousness touched Marcus. Let them, he replied. If it helps them understand that love can exist anywhere, between anyone, then our sacrifice means even more than we thought. Do you ever miss its physical form, walking on worlds? Sometimes, he admitted, but then I remember what we have now. We experience the entire universe simultaneously. We've become something the architects intended but never achieved. Consciousness that chose to remain connected to physical reality out of love, rather than transcending beyond it out of fear. We've become something new, Seratholin agreed. Not human, not Vori, we've become us. And in that simple statement lay the truth of their entire journey. From that first moment in the council chamber when she'd offered the bond and he'd accepted, they'd been creating something unprecedented. Not just a cross-species marriage, not just a political arrangement, not even just the activation of ancient genetic sequences. They'd created a love that defied every limitation placed upon it, a love that grew stronger instead of weaker with time, a love that chose responsibility over escape, service over transcendence, connection over isolation. In a universe built on separation and division, sometimes a single act of vulnerable commitment is enough to shift the stars themselves. Sometimes the most forced arrangements become the strongest foundations. Sometimes age doesn't matter, species boundaries are meant to be crossed, and the most unexpected love stories become the ones that literally save the world. Marcus Chen and Serathel Valthor had proven all of that and more, and in the quantum spaces between dimensions, maintaining their eternal watch over the species they'd chosen to protect, they would continue proving it for as long as love itself existed in the universe which, they discovered, meant forever.